Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L here to talk about My Hero Academia chapter 293. Yeah, I think it's 293. Yes, 293. Hey everybody, a little bit late. I'm recording this on Monday morning. I'm hoping to get it out by Monday afternoon, but we'll have to see. But hey, how you doing? So very quick notes, just for the beginning. I kind of rushed through writing the review for this one. It's still a good 4 pages of notes, but I kind of rushed through. So if there's anything I missed, please just let me know. Usually when I'm rushing through to get things done, some things slip by. But anyway, yeah, this chapter of Hero Academia, we got Bakugo's hero name. Yeah, so for this chapter, the big events are Meteor's return being explained, Bakugo's hero name being revealed, and the best Genus backup, Dobby being parted from Shoto, and Makia being tossed over. Of those 5 events, I would say that only 3 really progressed the battle. So for battle progression, I do think it was a little bit slow. And I do think that the rhetoric took up a good portion of the chapter. Dobby's rhetoric particularly was a bit of a good regurgitation. But aside from that, it was a chapter that really tried to show off the reveals. So in exchange for, I think, a bit of a slower chapter, you have the reveals, which add to a little bit of the excitement. But those reveals, like Bakugo's hero name, that's not important for a battle. It might say some things about Best Genus, like him saying it now might be an indicator that Best Genus won't be around to hear that later. It's things like that, right? Like the name doesn't lead to the battle. It's just a nice highlight, which does cause an interesting effect in the chapter, and that moment is a moment of levity. Since we're now on a swing of levity, I do hope that we continue just being happy times and we head to a conclusion here. Anyway, as you saw the title, I think there was a new quirk revealed here for Izuku. So we'll talk about that first because that's the most exciting thing. So I'm going to direct you to page 16. Check out this panel. Now, right after this panel, we have Izuku saying this feeling just like earlier. So already, you have this panel happening here, and then you have Izuku talking about a feeling. That makes you think, oh, there's something going on. Now, you might be thinking, oh, but Trip, that could just be intuition. And you're right, unless we have more. The panel that I am pointing you to, this one, is very specific. This panel, we've actually seen one that is very similar to it before. Might you guess which one it is? Because we have actually talked about the possibility of Izuku having a quirk or a new quirk popping up before. And the chapter that we talked about that in was in chapter 286. Do you remember this sequence of a panel? When we first saw this, I looked at it and I thought this was kind of weird. Like, how did Izuku notice this particular sequence of a panel? And like the way that it was drawn, it looked like it was a signal being beamed in. But the actual clincher, when you look at the panel from page 16, what you have to look at is that little lightning mark. Now, go back to chapter 286. I don't know which page exactly, but when you go below the panel that looks like it's a transmission, look at the same symbol that we have on Izuku's face. The same lightning kind of looking thing. And actually, one more thing. If you look on the page 16 panel, do you see the tone that the screen has? Look at the tone that the screen has for that little bit of Aizawa and the rest of them. It's the same tone. It's the same methodology. It's the same kind of atmosphere for them. I do think that if this isn't a quirk, this is a new quirk function, as in one of the quirks that Izuku already has unlocked has this as part of the function. I think that makes sense. I think when you have Izuku saying that he has a feeling in this chapter, and you combine it with that previous chapter, I think it's all reasonable to say that Izuku has some kind of precognition quirk. Now, what kind of precognition quirk could it be? If we are saying he has one, well, I don't know. Chapter 286 shows that Izuku was able to get images of people running away. Like Ryukyu running away is the big clincher that tells us that Izuku was able to see something through another sense. And then in this chapter, Izuku can tell that something bad is about to happen. So it seems like a souped up spider sense combined with a low acting remote viewing. That's what I would kind of point towards if you were to ask me. Now, I think, what's the saying? 1 time's a coincidence, 2 times is a pattern or something. Wait, no. Is it 2 times a coincidence, 3 times a pattern? So right now, 2 times a coincidence, but I do legitimately think the drawing of the lightning symbol, that signal, when you look at the whole idea that these panels are marked by like a signal kind of waveform, I do think that that's supposed to be saying that Izuku's receiving this information. But again, the name of the game is going to be whether or not this is a quirk function or a new quirk altogether. Because there's a potential one for all could still be getting involved here. But we'll have to see. Right now, I'm really hoping that it's a new quirk. I hope it's a quirk from the guy that gave the quirk to Nana, because I think that'd be the best. Anyway, we have more general notes, however, for the chapter. So other things that I enjoyed for the chapter, in the color page, this was for the poll. I made a wonderful video about the poll if you guys want to go check it out. But of course, be ready. It's a little bit of a sassy video because it was just for fun. But on the color page, Aizawa has an eye patch. I do wonder if that's supposed to be meaning that Aizawa right now does not have use of the eye. I'm not worried about Aizawa. Eri's now in play, so we can start playing that game of like Eri could be fixing people. Next up, I want to say awesome work to Horikoshi for the damage depiction. One of the things that I was thinking last chapter is that Mirio is underwhelming. Mirio can't really do much against the Nomus because he lacks the firepower that Endeavor has. Mirio isn't a destructive guy. So I love in this chapter that Horikoshi is proving that right. He says no to stupid power-ups, or he doesn't say no to stupid power-ups. He says no to stupid maneuvers. I'm happy. Mirio going in there and saying, hey, I can't beat up Nomu. Wonderful. He can delay them, give them a good brain shock, but that's all he is. Mirio's a frontline combatant. He's more like Red Riot than he is like Bakugo kind of thing. So I was very happy to see that. I also was happy to see Nejire. Nejire was in there. She was still fighting. She got hit by a whole face full of fire, but she did not get the burns that Shoto has. She does seem like she's pretty singed. I do think Nejire is going to end up with a new haircut, especially when you see that the left side of her face is so singed, and her hair, you can actually see that it's singed well. I'll point that out later on. But I love that she was able to get back into the fight because that makes sense to me. Fire doesn't hit hard. It burns, but it doesn't hit hard. She shouldn't be knocked out. She should be shocked by the pain. So I love the damage depiction. I think the author did a great job here. Another thing, Mirio's justification for being there and the flashback for it. We'll talk about the justification in the page-by-page walkthrough, but just the fact that it was a short flashback, thank God. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I would not have wanted a bigger flashback because that would have ruined the pacing, and we've already had that situation with Ochako and Toga. I don't want the pacing to be ruined anymore. I want to get out of here. I'm really happy the author opted for the 3-page flashback as opposed to anything bigger. And finally, the best thing about the chapter is Momo's contribution is finally showing up now. Man, you guys know I was saying this, like, the big issue was whether or not that morale quirk was the one that was affecting whether or not the drug was working. You guys know that I was really hoping that Momo's thing was going to come in clutch here at the last minute. I'm so happy the author did it. Now, mind you, there's still a lot of things that can go wrong here. For instance, if the morale quirk kicks in, if it's the kind of quirk that when you activate it, it just gives you a whole boost of power, then shit, you know, it's going to be pretty tough for everyone. If Shigaraki first activates it, we're going to be in trouble. But for now, I'm just so happy. Finally, we can say that everything those kids did was not for naught. We had an idea that was going to be what was happening because we did see the themes on our side or Izuku's side being that every little thing added up to making this not the worst it could have been. I'm glad that we can now add Momo stuff in there, and I am very impressed that Momo and the other kids are actually still active. That was really good. Overall, when it comes to the Momo portion, I am so happy. This is what I wanted. This is what I was hoping for. Thank you, Horikoshi, for giving us that little bit of hope. Momo has now her contribution has been worthwhile. I think now we can start seeing more positive things coming out here. Good stuff overall for 293 when it comes to those very small moments. Now, let's get into the notes. Page 1. Page 1 is a little bit weird in that its purpose is specifically to tell us what's going on. Now, what I'd like to know is how Eri, a child traumatized by villains, can calmly eat a snack after All Might sat her in front of a screen showing utter mayhem and destruction. Like, I don't know, man. Eri looks so innocent, and it's like, I know All Might isn't that great of a parent. I know he's not that great of a guardian. I know he made her watch that whole thing. But the point of that shot is just to show us that the horn is small. You could have seen that in the original All Might shot if you like zoomed in really closely. But yeah, no, good to know that the horn is small. Anyway, next we had Mirio's explanation. And I really like Mirio's explanation here. And it's funny because like on stream, Miguel, you might remember, we were talking, well, Miguel a commenter was talking about how possibly maybe Meteor was being held in reserves because they didn't think that Meteor should be going back into the field. Now, with that idea, I thought Miguel had a good idea because that would have been a reasonable idea. But in my mind, I'm like, the Public Safety Commission is not competent enough to care about the well-being of students. So yeah, no, I didn't want to. I didn't believe it because it just didn't make sense to me. Other people were saying that Meteor came in on the jet, and it's like, no, where do we see that? How does that make sense? I just couldn't make sense of how Meteor would have been doing that. So actually finding out that on this page, what happened was that Meteor was at another location that isn't the villa and came here. This is actually good for multiple spots, but I gotta tell you, the translation for this particular explanation, I don't think is the best that we could have gotten. The Viz Media translation is only a little bit clearer than the fan translation. But just going off of the Viz Media translation. So here we're told that Media was another hideout. First, I really wish they didn't use the term hideout because that makes it seem like that's a whole other thing. I would have rather they said a base because that's the rhetoric that we have with the Liberation Front. We refer to their places as bases. So that's my first little gripe there. It is a whatever gripe. Anyway, when I read this line, what I understood is that one of the liberation bases was near Jakku. In other words, there is legit a base that is close enough that other people could show up from. Because we do know from Medio, he said we, right? So that means him and most likely the other members of the Night Eye Agency and most likely everyone else that was assigned to that particular place got word from the Villa team, because it makes sense that the Villa team would give out the information that, hey, there's a giant monster heading towards this area. Now, if anyone is saying that Emilio is not or was not at a villain hideout that was affiliated to the Liberation Front, I'm going to say you're being that's very unreasonable to say that, because the premise is on the big day of the operation, Media wanted to be there so that he could help out. And this is why I don't like them using keeping tabs, because keeping tabs makes it sound like you're surveilling as opposed to storming, which is what everyone else is doing. So again, do not like the word choice. But when you have Meteor talking about how he wants to be helpful, and when you have him saying we, I don't think that the Night Eye Agency somehow went to go deal with another villain group on a day that all the heroes are being pulled together for this giant operation that Bubble Girl knows about. What's the point of telling Bubble Girl about this if she's not part of the operation, right? So again, really unclear wording, but the fan translation was not clear either, which makes me think that this is an issue specifically with how Horikoshi worded the situation. And if that's the case, I do have to wonder why he felt the need to leave it so vague that the translations are coming out so wonky. Now, usually at that point, I would say that sometimes authors leave things vague so that they have more room to operate in later on. But this is a situation where you don't need the vagueness. So again, it's just that smells like that was a trick that the author was trying to pull, but I don't understand why he's trying to pull that trick unless he needs to justify something in the future and he hasn't worked it out fully yet. But again, I don't understand why make it so vague that the translations came out so different. Anyway, we move on to the next page, page 4, which was just pretty much explaining the Meteor and Eri situation and that Eri had been improving. The next page, page 5, was pretty cute. Ponytail Eri is adorbs. For this page, the cool stuff was that Eri waited for Aizawa to say yes. And now, with Eri fixing Meteor, we have to ask, how broken is Eri going to be in the story? How much use is she going to get? Because get ready, because now the author is going to have to put so many limits and excuses on Eri to make sure he doesn't break the tension of the story. It's going to be super funny seeing the most contrived excuses we're going to see to justify why this little girl cannot do more. Like, look at this tumor. It is gigantic, and look at it the day after. Clearly, Eri isn't going to be fixing anyone now because she doesn't have any accumulated charge. Also, don't ask how much healing a horn of that size could provide. Don't apply logic from what we've seen previously in the manga, because now this horn is going to be entirely dictated by the needs of the plot. We have now entered the realm of justifying why Eri can't be used as opposed to letting her naturally exist. And also pray the villains don't find out where she is, because if they do, the villains are going to want to take her out. Also, Eri can now single-handedly heal Hawks, Mirko, and Aizawa, with the only limit being the time that it will take to heal each of those 3 people. But I am sure that the Public Safety Commission would love to have Hawks and Mirko back on the field. So, Interesting stuff. But this is where we're going now in the future. With Eri now being able to do this, we're going to be seeing tons of excuses as to why Eri can't be used. If we want to see another character that the author tries to do things with, it's Aizawa, because Aizawa breaks the game. With Aizawa, you know, when it was in the Overhaul arc, Aizawa got taken out by another villain so that his power couldn't be used anymore, right? It's going to be like that. What it ultimately going to come down to is whether or not the excuses for Eri make sense in the story enough for us to say, oh, that's reasonable. Because the worst thing that we can get is Horikoshi shooing in the execution, and then we just be like, that's stupid, right? Right now, Horikoshi has a better track record than he doesn't for those excuses, so we'll have to see. Next page started premising Bakugo's sudden quirk expansion. But on this page, we also get Mirio asking for help. This is again Mirio being a person that knows his limits. In a lot of ways, this would be the trait that, you know, Izuku would need, because that was what Bakugo was saying, that Izuku shouldn't be doing things by himself. When Mirio doesn't have a good matchup, he can ask for help, as opposed to Izuku, who will do it himself. Now, there is a big asterisk. Izuku is so overpowered and has so much unused power that you honestly can't blame Izuku for believing that he has to shoulder stuff on his own. Especially in this situation where realistically Izuku was the only one that could delay everyone for everyone else to make a plan to go save him. The two characters fundamentally are really different. Mirio's in the position where he is a super weak guy that made his super weak power powerful, whereas Izuku's at a position where he was a super weak guy that got the most powerful power. Whereas Mirio is at the pinnacle of his power development. Izuku's at, let's say, 50% of the one for all power package and 2 out of 6 quirks unlocked, right? This would naturally lead to a very different way, or a very different approach when it comes to knowing your limits, because Izuku legitimately doesn't know his limits. And unfortunately, Izuku's the kind of guy who's been rewarded for going to his limits before, or going all out before, because he's been able to win the fights with the only thing he had to sacrifice being his limbs. Once you've sacrificed your limbs once, you're gonna have an easier time sacrificing them 5 more times afterward, right? Anyway, the next page, page 7, was Bakugo and his sudden quirk expansion, or what the Sensational Liberation Front calls it, an awakening. If anyone tells you that this wasn't a sudden quirk expansion, as I like to call it, or an awakening, they're playing a very misleading game using labels. Compare this situation to Toga. Something unknown to the person was used. With it came a sensation that they never felt before, that being on death's door. You could really say the threat of death is what pushed this new situation to come out. By the metrics of the Liberation Front, this would be an awakening, because that's what it happened when it was with Toga. I mean, when it happened to Toga, Toga was also on death's door. When it happened to Toga, Toga also needed something that would allow her to get away from death's door. Here you have a stimulus that provokes a desperate mindset, and you have the quirk expanding to alleviate the stimulus. We also saw this with Getten, although that was not as drastic, but there was a need for the quirk to be able to do more when it came to Getten's situation. Now, the thing about this expansion is that it's only affecting the quality of the explosions and nothing insane like giving Bakugo explosions from his feet. So it's not the most aggressive expansion we've ever seen. Now, I do want to speak on this. For those of the live stream and maybe on these videos, I don't know if I've mentioned it on these videos before. I've mentioned that Quirk Awakenings are pretty much the ultimate excuse to justify powers coming out of nowhere. The day that Horikoshi legitimized Quirk Awakenings by giving them that name was the day that he said a character can get a power up when he or she needs it the most during battle. Toga, she needed it the most during that fight. Bakugo, he needed the power most when Izuku was in trouble for this fight. So ultimately, this is exactly what we're seeing here, although I would say Bakugo is probably one of the better executions of Sudden Quirk Expansion because of how subtle the expansion was. But just remember, Quirk Awakenings are ultimately just an excuse for upgrading characters mid-fight and making the manga more exciting. That's ultimately what they are, just one of those plot devices. Page 8 to 9, double spread. Big thing is seeing that Nejire was okay, Ida jumping, and Bakugo's explosion. It is interesting how the explosions, you have points of light that are stylized like the one for all lights, and then you have those brutal explosions somehow happening. So seeing the variety and how the explosions struck around Best Jeanist, it actually says like Bakugo has some really wicked control on how these things detonate, or like he can time it well enough that he can have one explosion on Best Jeanist's right and one explosion on his left. It's just really neat. Page 10, we go into the name reveal. So when it came to the name reveal, I'm actually on Medio's side for this one. I love how Bakugo did so much while staying true to who he is. The infantile aggression on the title, and then you have the Dynamite name, which I really hope they change the spelling of, since it feels like that's an homage to All Might, but whatever. I love how consistent this is with Bakugo's character. I know people wanted Ground Zero. If you were on the live stream, you know I wanted Cat-chan because I thought that would be cute. But honestly, Dynamite is good enough for me. On the note of Ground Zero, I don't really understand why people were into that particular name when the idea of hero names are to inspire hope in people. I don't see how Ground Zero being the spot of where a bomb detonated, or when you have events like All Might's retiring and Bakugo being at the center of it, I don't see how Ground Zero isn't a name that inspires confidence. Ground Zero would have been a name that that inspired respect towards a tragedy. That's why I wasn't feeling it personally. So I'm really happy with Dynamite. I think it's adorable, and I think it's appropriate for what heroism is in My Hero Academia universe. These are names that inspire, not names that make people feel somber. Other note I had here is Nejide calling it disturbing, and here you can see that her hair was singed, so I do believe she's going to get a shorter haircut, maybe one to style after Ryukyu. Page 11 was just a reminder of Night Eye's influence on media while showing Bakugo failing the landing. Poor kid, like he's really trying his best, and seeing him fall on that landing is really unfortunate. Kind of reminds me of Shigaraki. Moving on, page 12 and 13 is more Dobby talking. Dobby has about, I would say, there's like what, 6 panels of dialogue. He has about one worthwhile panel, and that being that the heroes are having fun. So I do think it's kind of jarring to have that one moment of levity in a field of destruction. The last time we saw this was when the guys had that reaction at the Nomus, and it's like you have that reaction at the Nomu, but those Nomu have taken out half of the heroes that were sent to deal with them. So I don't like, that going back and forth between levity and just a really nasty situation. Like, quite literally, Shoto is being burned alive over here by his brother that he thought was dead, and everyone else is making jokes about Bakugo's hero name, right? It's weird. Now, as people point out, this is something Shonen Jump does. I think this might just be something to improve the situation, just because this has been a depressing arc in general with all these things happening. But man, it's one of those jarring moments, right? Like, as a reader, I have to call it out. It's jarring. Doesn't make sense in the context of the situation. This is like that. This is like Shiozaki asking the villain who goes on to murder hundreds of people, squishing them beneath his feet, to forgive her for holding him down. Like, you know what? Screw that. We don't need that kind of stuff. That's not cool, right? It's that kind of stuff. Just a little bit jarring, but I think this might have been, because of the nature of Shonen Jump, this might have also have been a much needed moment of levity, just because, well, it's depressing. The only thing is, I really do legitimately hope that we stay on the positive and we don't take a sudden turn back to depression. Anyway, on page 12, Dobby keeps showing us how obsessed he is with hurting Endeavor. And man, I swear, Dobby probably owns a lot of Endeavor merchandise. I wouldn't be surprised if Dobby has an Endeavor body pillow that he burns and sometimes punches, because that's Dobby. Also, Dobby says Shoto was raised with love, which just tells us Dobby's view is pretty warped right now, unless he's speaking sarcastically, but it's really hard to tell that through text. I think Dobby's just a little bit more unhinged, especially when he's calling Endeavor dad. That's speaking of an attachment. If a Buddhist saw Dobby, they would be like, yeah, this is attachments in the worst possible way. And you gotta remember, attachments are not just ones based on love. Hate is also an attachment because of the emotional response that it invokes. Page 13 was the Dobby ecstasy page. It's really great that Dobby has such a fun time when he's imagining his dad's faces. But yeah, good looking page though. Really surprised Dobby hasn't burned to a crisp yet. And I also gotta ask, how is his belt buckle not melting yet? Like, the steel melted but not his belt buckle? How? And also, how are his piercings not melting yet? Like, what are they made of? Anyway, page 14, Izuku meddles once more with Black Whip, grabbing onto Dobby, which leads me to Froppy. Now, I do have a little bit of a criticism here for Izuku, and we talked about this on the live stream. It's a bit of a nuanced situation, but I'm going to say flat out, I am concerned when I see Izuku doing these things, because Izuku has a history of being the kind of person who gets tunnel vision and gets stuck in a cage that he makes by himself. And the cage is made from his habits of analyzing other heroes. So let's tackle this point by levels. First, it's really cool that Izuku is learning from his classmates. That's awesome. It's really cool that Izuku adapted something from Froppy. Super awesome because I ship it. But this becomes a problem if and only if Izuku only ever does this with Black Whip and doesn't expand. Because right now it seems to me like Black Whip is being held back by Izuku's lack of creativity. Izuku right now is the person who he becomes original by copying so many other people that you can't tell who he copied from initially because it's a hodgepodge of everyone else. But when Black Whip is coming out of Izuku's mouth, and we've seen it like kind of come out of his arms before, I think. But let's just see, it's coming out of his mouth. The fact that Black Whip is coming out of his mouth, what is to stop Black Whip from coming out of the forehead with multiple tendrils? What's to stop Black Whip from coming out of every part of his skin and covering him like a suit of armor? What's to stop Black Whip from doing that? I think nothing other than Izuku's own tunnel vision. Because at the end of the day, Black Whip doesn't need somatic components in order to move. Izuku has shown us that he can move Black Whip just by willpower. On this page, even, you get to see Izuku, one of the Black Whips is going straight while the other one wraps around Dobby. That's control. So as we go into the future here, I hope that Horikoshi is not going to put Izuku through a rehash of Izuku having to come up with new creative moves, and I hope he allows Izuku to expand his creativity naturally. What I want to see from Izuku is a guy who starts with a copy and makes it his own thing after a little bit more time. But have we seen that from Izuku so far? I don't know. I mean, Izuku adopted kicks, but those are just kicks. Izuku uses Air Force, but All Might uses Air Force. We don't have a lot of Izuku original moves. You could say Full Cowling is an original move, but I would say it's original training wheels. So that's one of the unfortunate things there. I legitimately hope that Izuku doesn't get tunnel vision here. I think he could have done more than what he did here. When I see this, it just sounds like, again, it all depends on the author. This is one of those moments that will be either the start of a bad habit in the future, or it's going to be the start of a great thing, and only the future will be able to say what it is. Page 15 to 16 is pretty much Izuku saying aloud why people should give Endeavor a chance. With the fandom, well, with that vocal fandom and how it is with Endeavor, I really do hope that Izuku saying this makes some people change their minds, because allowing someone the opportunity to change is a fundamental act of kindness that a good part of society is kind of predicated on. So people should be willing to afford someone that opportunity. That's not to say that a person should get away scot-free, but there is a difference between saying that someone should be adequately punished and denying someone the opportunity for redemption. Those two ideas are very different. Page 16 also starts Dobby's speech, and it's just a little bit of a dumpster fire, though Dobby still beats it out in both heat and smell. Dobby's asking for pity, and it's like, no, I don't pity you. Anyone that asks for pity while also being chill with murdering innocent people in order to invoke more pity, like because, oh my god, look at me, I became a murderer, you're a sociopath. Because they're aware that they can inspire pity and use that to their advantage. It's like, no, I'm not doing that. Not playing that game. Dobby's stupid. Next, he says justice is losing the war. Hard to say. If justice does lose the war, I hope Dobby realizes that in doing so, the evils of domestic abuse may just run more rampant. But then again, Dobby only cares about one thing, Endeavor. He doesn't care about what other people are going through. He doesn't care about other people going through domestic abuse, as seen as in how he treats Shoto. So Dobby saying the future is going to be one of chaos, you know, I think even if that does happen, history's going to repeat itself. The heroes and vigilantes are going to come out again, and they're going to try and get everything under control. Every single kid that just had their parent squished by the villains, well, a good chunk of them are probably going to go super Batman on the villains, and they're going to, everything that the villains have caused here, they're going to deserve. So, yeah. That's what I have to say about Dobby's lines, but the lines are just, again, regurgitation of ideas that we already have a sense of. There's nothing new or original coming out of those lines. Dobby's pretty much reached his limit of rhetoric. He can't really do much. Now he's just spiraling. Ending did this as well back in the day. Once a villain starts spiraling in their rhetoric, the rhetoric's done. We've reached the deepest part of the character for now. Page 18, we have Endeavor doing that one last attack. He was really putting everything he had in it. And in page 19, we see he began to fall down as we see the 3 kids that contributed to the fall: Momo, Kirishima, and Mina. So where do we go from here? Well, that's the end of the chapter. I think the best route is honestly the League getting captured here and now and all of them going to jail. I don't know how they're going to handle Makia, but that'll be something. The other route could be, it's a portion of them getting captured and the other escaping. Maybe the traitor reveals themselves and gives them a way to escape. Now, Toga is still active as well, but I'm still partial to Toga being separated from the villains for a while because Spinner pretty much set up separation flags. One other route that we could have is the villains pulling something out of their pocket again and we go back on the misery ride. I have yet to see Skeptic. I don't know what Skeptic could do, but we don't see Skeptic. When it comes down to me, I think what I would really enjoy is a portion of the villains being captured, another portion getting away. We still have the Liberation Front running over here. There's still a lot of question marks. But yeah, I feel like I'd be okay with that. If some of the villains get away, we have a justification for prison break. The Doctor is going to prison as well. The Doctor is going to have to be rescued if Shigaraki wants a perfect body. Shigaraki being in prison will just lead to more problems. At some point, you know, an attack on UA can still happen because Aizawa kept saying how amazing UA is. So right now, I think if we have a happy medium of villains escaping and villains going to jail to trigger a prison break, I think that would be really cool. Any other things that I can see happening in the next couple of weeks? Toga, I think, is going to still be separated from the villains. I'm trying to pull together all the different plot threads I can, but I can't think of any others right now. Yeah, no, man, I'm just pretty excited to get out of this arc, but I'm starting to think we might not leave here until chapter 300, which is going to be depressing. Anyway, everyone, let me know what you thought down below, and till next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.